So I saw this news article the other day and it kind of inspired me to work on this video simply because I have fond memories of watching this particular studio's name on a lot of titles, and I usually would enjoy a lot of those titles that I was interested in. That studio is Japan Studio. I'm not sure how many of you guys kind of feel the same way, but I would remember a lot of games that I played would usually have this logo in front of them. Now, the thing is, this studio is both an internal production studio, so this studio that would fully develop certain games, and they're also an external studio that would provide support to certain developers. So if we actually go over here to the Wikipedia page of Japan Studio, guys, we'll see games like Demon Souls, which is absolutely phenomenal. We all know that Demon Souls is developed by From Software, went on to become probably one of the best, if not the best developers that we have in the industry right now. But at the time, they worked together with Japan Studio to produce games like Demon Souls. And then if you go a little bit further down, you're going to find things like White Knight Chronicles 2, which is also another really fun game. You go a little bit further down, you're going to find the Eco and Shadow of Colossus collection. The reason I'm only looking at this particular date is because I only started playing PlayStation 3 at around 2010, which is when I bought my first PlayStation console. I know I got into those things kind of late, so I never really played Shadow of the Colossus or Eco when those games came out, but I most definitely played them later with the HD collection. And this is a game that was entirely produced by Team Eco inside Sony Japan, which was a phenomenal game. Another game that I ended up playing later, this was on the Vita, was Gravity Rush. This game is phenomenal. To this day, I still feel like Gravity Rush is incredibly underrated. It's just absolutely insane. And then this particular game, I parrot it all the friggin' time in my channel. So if you guys have been to any live stream, if you guys have been in my channel, you guys will know that this is one of my favorite games, Soul Sacrifice. Absolutely phenomenal. Absolute banger of a game that fundamentally died on the PlayStation Vita, and PlayStation has no interest in bringing this game back, even though this is probably like, if you guys ever played Monster Hunter, you know how you get a lot of Monster Hunter clones. Soul Sacrifice is likely the best one of those, straight up, because it has a lot of original concepts. It just does a lot of really fantastic things, and it has an absolutely banger story. I'm sure that if you go down this list, you're going to find a lot of things that you're interested in as well. Soul Sacrifice Stealth is kind of like an ultimate version of Soul Sacrifice. Strangely enough, I also played this, which is kind of like this card game, Destiny of Spirits. I used to play this on the PlayStation Vita. Really fun game, actually. I really enjoyed it. Freedom Wars. We actually had a remaster of Freedom Wars recently, which came out on like most major consoles and all of that stuff. Really good stuff. Naturally, Bloodborne was worked on together with Sony Japan as well as From Software. You got Gravity Rush remastered here, and there's a bunch of more stuff like the remaster, the remake of Shadow of the Colossus. You got Astrobot. There's tons of stuff that these guys have worked on until eventually they were shut down in, I believe, 2021. And recently we had Shuhei Yoshida talking about this particular situation, and it was very disappointing. I mean, not because of what Shuhei Yoshida had to say, not because of Shuhei Yoshida himself, but because of what he reported on, right? It says here, former PlayStation head says the rise of AAA games shut down Japan Studio because Sony wanted to drive hardware sales with games like God of War and Uncharted. Now, don't get me wrong. I like God of War. God of War is one of the main reasons why I bought the PlayStation 3. I think God of War is absolutely fantastic. At that time, it was God of War 3. It was the one that was like all the big rage when I bought the PlayStation 3. It was God of War, Demon Souls, and Wipeout. Those were the three games that made me want to get a PlayStation instead of getting an Xbox. Because at that time, I was going to buy a console, regardless if it was going to be a PlayStation or an Xbox. And those three games were the reason why it was a PlayStation. That, and I also had a friend that also had a PlayStation, so there was also a little bit of influence there. But yeah, then they go on to say that's the kind of game that's in demand, says Shuhei Yoshida. This is very interesting. I'm going to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole, so bear with me here. former president of Sony Interactive Entertainment Worldwide Studios, Shuhei Yoshida, has explained that the company shut down Japan's studio in 2021 because its games didn't drive console sales. He goes on to say that if you love the company's creative games and support a former developers by playing Slitterhead and Ratatan. During his keynote speech at the Computer Entertainment Developers Conference that's been translated by Games Radar Plus, Yoshida says that he is frequently asked about PlayStation's closure of Japan's studio. Yeah, I bet. Look at all the games they worked on. These were fantastic. We're getting like none of these now. It's insane. So, yeah, players from around the world have said that it's unbelievable that Sony would shut down Japan's studio. He says Japan's studio released loads of games, creative games, didn't it? Yes, it did. I just showed you some of my favorite ones. I'm sure in this list you're going to find a lot of games that you probably loved, maybe even more than me. And he says Japan Studio released loads of games. At the time, I was saying something similar. Japan Studio is responsible for some of the best and most innovative games in PlayStation's history: Ape Escape, Shadow of the Colossus, Siren, Loco Roco, Patapon, Gravity Rush, Astrobot, and many more games come from the talented teams at Japan Studio. Essentially, if you fondly remember a PlayStation game with an ingenious hook, it was probably made there. Or, I would add, co-developed there, because they would do a lot of co-development stuff with other PlayStation partners. At that time, the head of development, I was worried about Keiichiro Toyama, creator of Silent Hill and other Japanese developers at Japan Studio, Yoshida says. But while they came up with a lot of creative ideas, the games they made weren't big in scale. What we call AA games are a perfect fit for the PlayStation Vita, but we were slowly shifting to AAA on the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, and sometimes it's difficult to scale up like that. And it's interesting to hear this because it starts putting the pieces together as to why Sony started abandoning the PlayStation Vita, which was a phenomenal console. Like, I don't know how many, probably not a lot of people in here have a PlayStation Vita, but if those of us that did have a PlayStation Vita back in the day, we know what it was like. There were fantastic games in that platform. Absolutely phenomenal. Like I keep saying, Freedom Wars. You guys know that Tokiden initially was only on the Vita, only later released on PlayStation 3 and then PlayStation 4. Now it's on Steam as well. And I've actually bought those a couple of months ago. I need to cover Tokiden 1 and 2 as well at some point to kind of give you guys some memories of what those games were like. But like, we had Tokiden, Freedom Wars, Soul Sacrifice, Delta. We had Persona 4 Gold. And even though that is something that came from, I think, PlayStation 2, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know exactly when Persona 4 originally was, if it was PlayStation 2 or 3 or whatever. But, the first time I played it was on the Vita. It was phenomenal. There were amazing games on that platform. And quite simply, Sony just let that platform to rot. Despite the creativity of Japan Studios' Vita and VR games, sales were poor compared to other PlayStation behemoths. Of course, but it gave you a variety. See, this is the problem that we're in right now in this industry because most studios made this shift. They ignored the AA market and they just went after the AAA, the big blockbusters, which caused them to get like this friggin' ballooning budget. It's absolutely moronic that all they think about is like, we need the biggest budget, the most AAA, the most yada, 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 and the hell with AA. And this is why there's actually a lot of independent developers coming in and filling in those AA spaces with absolute banger titles like one that I never get tired of talking about, Remnant 2. Amazing game. It's just a shame that apparently it doesn't sell as much as it deserves. But by the way, if you guys never played Remnant 2, big recommendation for me. Absolutely love it. There's more AA titles that we can talk about. Like just this year, we're going to be getting Crimson Moon is another one of those. It's kind of like more of a AA title, but seems to have really strong hooks. I'm going to be probably doing something with that game soon. But there's a lot of AA titles like kind of filling this void that was left behind by the industry, and this was something that a studio like Studio Japan was working on. But that got me digging a little bit more about, because Shuhei Yoshida had been speaking recently, so I found also this article here from This Week in Video Games, and this talks about the fact that, and this is an older article, but it talks about the fact that Jim Ryan fired Shuhei Yoshida from PlayStation Studios because I didn't listen to him. This is hilarious if you take, the added context of what Jim Ryan ended up doing with the PlayStation brand, which we're going to get into here as well. But basically, he goes on to say Shuhei Yoshida, the former head of Sony Worldwide Studios, the division now known as PlayStation Studios, has remarked that he was fired from the role by then CEO Jim Ryan because I didn't listen to him. The best part, Shuhei Yoshida was probably right not to listen to Jim Ryan because that guy's an absolute tool that drove the PlayStation brand into the friggin' ground. Speaking at the 2026 edition of the Australian Games Festival Alt Games, the 31 PlayStation veteran introduced himself by recounting his long career, including his transition from leading PlayStation's first-party studio efforts for over a decade to becoming the company's indie game evangelist as head of PlayStation Indies. I helped Santa Monica to make God of War, Naughty Dog to make Uncharted, and The Last of Us, and Sucker Punch to make the beautiful Ghost of Tsushima. Bro, Ghost of Tsushima was so good. How Ghost of Tsushima didn't win Game of the Year over Last of Us 2 is still something that will always be like stuck here. You know, I'm like, I'm choking on it, okay? It was one of the last games that I worked on as president of Worldwide Studios. But in 2019, after 11 years of leading the first party development, I was fired from the role. Jim Ryan wanted me to remove from first party because I didn't listen to him. He said, jovially prompting laughter from the audience. He asked me to do some ridiculous things, and I said no. When Guerrilla Games co-founder Herman Hulse was announced as new head of Worldwide Studios, Sony was vague about the terms of transition, simply saying that Yoshida will leave his current position as president of Worldwide Studios to become head of a newly formed initiative that will focus on nurturing external independent creators. So basically, because he wouldn't listen to Jim Ryan's dumb nonsensory, he got fired. The best part is now some of you guys that maybe aren't super familiar with PlayStation Story, which, by the way, this is all relevant for the current situation of PlayStation ditching physical media. What is Jim Ryan's kind of like legacy that he left with PlayStation? Sony projects launching 12 live service games by 2025. Jim Ryan's glorious legacy. What these live service games could be are currently unknown. Jim Ryan doubled down on Sony's commitment to increasing its live service offerings in the coming years during the game and network services portion of Sony's 2022 business segment. And I wanted to just show you guys what those games were. I have a list here. Let me just grab that real quick. Okay. Should be one of these. Oh, I actually had the tab there. Whatever. But I didn't have the list at hand, so I just pulled this up on Grok. Helldivers 2, one of its 12 live services. Helldivers 2 is actually one of the successful ones. We have Concord. We all remember how that worked out. Shut down roughly after 2 weeks to poor performance. Studio later closed for $100 million, just like Gone with the Wind. Canceled. Last of Us Online multiplayer factions canceled late 2023. Spider-Man: The Great Web canceled. Twisted Metal live service canceled. London studio canceled. Studio closed. Bungie Project Payback, so third-person Destiny spinoff canceled. Banned studio unannounced live service open world system. By the way, this is the person that fired Shuhei Yoshida from being, the lead of Sony Worldwide Studios. This is his legacy right here. Look at what this man was able to do. He was able to burn millions, maybe billions of dollars, okay? This man is likely one of the main reasons why Sony is now taking this step of abandoning physical media, because we need to get some more profits to make over the fact, to kind of like wash over the bad taste that Jim Ryan left in investors' mouths, okay? And by the way, none of us, the gamers, are responsible for Jim Ryan's and whoever the hell else in leadership approved all of this bullshittery of a plan. We're not the ones responsible for this bullshit, by the way. Still in development or later status, Marathon Bungie, yeah, that's been real successful. We've seen how that one's been doing. Fair Games Haven Studios, I thought this got canceled. I'm not 100% how this one's doing. And the Horizon multiplayer game that's coming out that I looked at multiple times, I'm like, I really wish that was a character that looked even mildly appealing for me to play as in that game, because it seems like it could be fun. but it's just I don't know what they were thinking with those characters. But regardless of that, this is, the person who ended up firing Shuhei Yoshida from the leadership of Worldwide Studios. Shuhei Yoshida, who also, by the way, greatly supported Sony Japan Studio. This is just such a friggin' absolute mess. Like I just saw this story from how the studio ended up closing down. It just made me so sad because they just focused on, okay, we need to hyper specialize on this one type of video game and forget everything else. And it's like, what about the other really cool experiences that people were having? Like in my case, friggin' what about where's my soul sacrifice? Where's more stuff kind of like Shadow of the Colossus? Where's where all these games? They're gone, gone. It sucks.